Chapter 2. The scent of roses. Why could Izzy smell roses? She forced her eyes open. Harland wouldn't even let her buy scented soap. Lula's face hovered over hers. She'd made it. Lula's rose-scented hand reached down and clasped hers as a tear fell from Lula's cheek. "What did he do to you? Why didn't you tell me in your letters, dear Izzy?" Lula drew Izzy's hand to her chest and held it there tightly. "He was a monster, wasn't he? A dreadful monster." What could Izzy have said? Her own parents hadn't believed her. Harland's treatment had been within their sight, and they'd done nothing. How would Lula have believed her in a letter? Not to mention what might have befallen her if Harland had discovered what she'd done. Most of the damage Harland had wrought could be fixed, with time. Izzy squeezed her eyes shut, pushing away the flood of pain once again. She wouldn't drown now that she was free. "It isn't anything." She pushed herself to sit up, and the edges of her vision darkened, pushing her back against the arm of the couch. Izzy took a deep breath and tried to focus on Lula. "Isn't anything? Have you looked in a mirror lately? You're skin and bones. Don't try and tell me this wasn't Harland's fault. I heard what he said about you in class after you married him." She stood up and paced to one end of the room and back again, the blonde ringlets that had fallen from her bun bouncing with every movement. Quite a feat in her large state. Lula never paced. It drove her crazy, yet she was quivering with fury. "You needn't worry about him anymore. He died days ago." Izzy couldn't believe how easy it was to say the words, and she couldn't even remember the exact number of days it had been now. Lula spun and faced her. "He died? How? Better question, how did you get here?" Lula strode back to her and sat, regarding her with those intense blue eyes. She had almost forgotten what it was like to sit and talk to a friend, to confide in anyone. How had she lived so long without Lula, her most dear friend? "About the only thing Harland didn't sell to pay for rent was his horse, so I took it. I don't know who paid for his burial, and I don't care. I know I should be ashamed, but I'm not. He was a horrible man. I still haven't figured out what he ever saw in me, or why he wanted to marry me. He was dissatisfied from the very start. After you told me what he had said in class, that I was too big under all my underthings, I told him what I thought of his talking about me. After that, he didn't even pretend to care." The cold tone of her own accounting made her shiver. It was like she spoke of someone else's life, not her own. Izzy stopped, took a breath, then finished. "The day of your wedding was the last time I went out on my own. He didn't want anyone to see me after that." Utter shock and pain crossed Lula's sweet face. "How can that be? Didn't you go to the store? How could he just keep you inside, like a prisoner?" Heat rushed up her cheeks. Every time she thought about what he had done, she felt like someone's misbehaving child, not a wife. "He told me if I left the apartment, he wouldn't allow me to eat for one whole day. He would stay home or have people from town watch me and make sure I didn't. We always lived above a store or another house, so the people below would know if I tried to leave." Even now that it was over, she couldn't stop from wringing her hands as she told the tale. He had controlled her every movement. Her heart raced as though he had walked through the door and hit her with his foul words once again, just for speaking ill of him. "I suffered through a whole summer with various creative punishments. I prayed for the school year to start, so he could begin his internship and I would have a measure of freedom from him. Except he didn't get it. He was turned away. We went to Tipton where he heard they were looking for a teacher. He only worked there for about 6 months when the school board fired him." "Fired him?" Lula slid forward in her seat. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Let's get you a little bite to eat and let you rest." She patted Izzy's hand, and though she didn't want to speak of it, she had to tell someone to share her burden, or she might burst. "I was pregnant, Lula," Izzy choked. She had never told anyone. The precious life had long dried up, but she hadn't been able to bear speaking about it before, and she needed comfort from someone. Seeing Lula with her rounded waist ripped open the ache. "When I told him, I thought he'd be happy, that he would finally love me, or at the least, would love the babe." The burn of tears strained against her eyes, but no moisture would come. Instead, he went to the whorehouse and got herbs to take care of it. He put them in my food and didn't tell me until after I'd eaten. Her sob was so powerful it nearly broke her, but her eyes remained dry. "I should have known when he encouraged me to eat. I should have been suspicious. He never wanted me to eat. Why didn't I see it, Lula?" The guilt she had placed on her own shoulders weighed all the heavier after her admission. Lula pressed her rose-scented kerchief into Izzy's hand. Izzy patted at her eyes with an automatic motion, but no tears came. "After that, his punishments didn't bother me. I never wanted to eat again anyway. I think part of my heart died along with the precious baby." Lula pressed her tiny hands to Izzy's cheeks. "Now, you listen to me. I'm so sorry for all the things he did to you. I knew he was awful, but I never would have guessed he'd go so far as to kill his own child. You're here now and you're safe. We'll take care of you." Izzy's stomach rumbled, and she jumped at the strange noise. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to even think about food. The last few months, she had only eaten because she had to in order to stay alive. Even then, though, she wondered at the time why she bothered. "Rest now. I'll bring you in a tray." Rest. That was exactly what she needed. Conrad stood in the stable waiting for his wrangler Stan to show up. He was always late, but he was the best Conrad had ever seen with the horses. Conrad had fed and watered Talon and the bay and the white pinto Mrs. Lawson had rode in on, and now he had nothing to do. The horse now stood content in its stall, its head and neck relaxed. It might even be sleeping, not that he'd go over and check. It had been ridden a long time, at least from the sheen of sweat shining on his coat, and obviously so had Mrs. Lawson. Where had she come from, and why? He'd never been so curious about a woman before. Granted, this one had landed right in his arms, and that didn't happen every day. Stan trudged into the opposite end of the barn, his legs permanently bowed from a life spent on a horse, and his hat a little too floppy to do much good. "Boss, what you be needin'?" The lazy way Stan spoke made Conrad's ears ring, and he gritted his teeth. "I need about 5 extra ropers for the next month. Pay is $1 a day, no more." Stan leaned against a wide beam. A slow smile crept over rotten and missing teeth. "Want me to write up the contracts?" The evil gleam in Stan's eye shot right to Conrad's heart. There was no way Conrad could write up the contract himself. The only one who probably could was Barton, and he'd never ask his little brother to do it. "Just get them here. They don't need to be under contract. It's only a month." "What if they ask for one?" Stan narrowed his eyes and waited. Conrad hated feeling trapped, but if Stan knew for sure he couldn't read, he might take advantage. While he was good with horses, he wasn't a good man. Then they don't need a job. He turned on his heel. Stan had recently left him feeling agitated at every turn. He'd need to find someone else to work with soon. Whose horse is that? Don't recognize it." A chill drove up Conrad's back. Mrs. Lawson didn't need to worry about the wrangler coming anywhere near her, and Stan might make it a point to be bothersome. "Just a visitor for Barton's wife. None of your concern." Stan laughed and headed back the way he came. The time to replace Stan was fast approaching. It would have to be done when he could manage to find the time to look for another wrangler who was good enough. They had so many horses they couldn't go without, not even for a day. Now that his meeting with Stan was over, he wandered back up to the house, which really wasn't his place. He only came back to the house for a family supper on Sunday. But Mrs. Lawson was a curiosity, one his other brothers hadn't discovered yet. He peered through the door and saw her tiny feet still propped up against the end of the couch. She was still lying where he'd left her. Was she awake? He pulled the door open and sneaked inside, careful not to make any noise. Her eyes were closed, with a dark ribbon of lashes sweeping over her cheeks. There was an empty plate next to her. Praise the Lord, she had eaten something. It would take more than one plate to get her looking fit again, though. His feet shuffled quietly over the floor as he made his way over to her. What had brought her out to the Broken Circle O, and would she stay? As he sat in the chair facing the couch, it groaned under his weight, and her blue eyes slid open. They widened for just a moment, and she sucked in air as if she might scream, as she backed as far into the couch as she could. He had to stop her before she sent the whole house running. "Don't be scared. You met me on the road, remember?" He knew he was muscled and a little rangy, and with a life of hard work and his ma's good cooking, he could be a mite scary. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as she took in every inch of his face, the wariness slipping away slowly. He liked the way she took her time to look him over and didn't try to hide it. So many women hid behind fans or pretended to never really look at anything, but Mrs. Lawson fairly inspected him. "I didn't remember, but now I do. My mind is still a little sleep-muddled." She didn't raise her head from the couch, and he would have told her not to bother if she had. He couldn't keep from staring at her until she closed her eyes and heat rose up her cheeks. He averted his eyes to his hands in his lap. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so bold. My mama tells me I have the worst manners." He glanced back into her eyes, and she returned it, reaching for his hand and lightly patting the top of his knuckles. "I assure you, your manners are impeccable compared to what I'm used to. Thank you, sir." Her gentle touch left a lingering heat against his skin, like the warmth of the summer sun. "Please don't call me sir. It doesn't seem to fit me. Appears like you're practically family to Lula, so why don't you just call me Conrad like everyone else?" "I hardly know you." She turned her face away, the red in her cheeks deepening. "If we were in some stuffy drawing room or even in town where people would hear, I'd agree with you. But no one out here will care. They all know my name. We are a bit unconventional out here." And the faster he did away with formalities, the faster he could learn more about this strange, lovely woman. Izzy looked up at him, her chin to her chest. "Well, if we are to completely flout convention, then you must call me Izzy. I was married, so it isn't as if I'm not used to it. Not to mention, I rather hate the name Lawson." He'd have to find out what her husband had done to make this beauty hate him so, but not today. He stood ready to let her get more rest and watched as her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "Well, there you have it. Some day I'll ask you what Izzy stands for." "That's an easy question to answer." She sighed as she made herself comfortable on the couch once again, stretching her toes languidly and arranging the blanket. "I am Isabella Rosemary. It was good to meet you, Conrad, and thank you for making sure I got to the house. The last thing I remember is trying to dismount from Mule. I was just so tired." Now it was his turn to get hot under the collar. She didn't remember he had carried her in the house, and he wasn't about to remind her. There was no way to do it without sounding like some cad anyway. "Did you name the horse?" He chuckled as he banished the thought of her in his arms to the back pastures of his mind. "No, my fool husband named her, but that was my fault too. He said she was just as stubborn as me, but he wouldn't curse her with my name." An inexplicable rage shot through Conrad's body, and he closed his eyes to rein it in. "I think you should give her a new name." He turned so she wouldn't see the anger her words had built. What sort of man needed to cut down his wife like this Lawson? Better that he never find out. "Perhaps I will, but not today. Today, a new life begins, one where I can finally rest." He couldn't have stopped himself from turning one last time as she closed her pretty blue eyes. Izzy Lawson wasn't like any woman he'd ever met, but he still wouldn't let Lula use her to get to him. Not even pretty little Izzy could get him to do something he didn't want to. He'd show them all by staying far from the house, and Izzy. Not even Pa would get him to admit he was a failure and that he couldn't read. Not even after years of sitting in a classroom. No pretty bit of a teacher would be able to help him after all this time either.